The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, and I knew it was trouble before I even opened it because our HOA president, Karen Thompson, never sent good news through certified mail. I stood in my driveway in Boulder, Colorado, still wearing my work gloves from the detached workshop behind my house, watching the postal carrier drive away while feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. My name is Brett Sullivan, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 3 years without major incident. Sure, there had been the usual minor complaints about my trash cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours, or that time I painted my front door without getting pre-approval for the exact shade of navy blue. But this felt different. The envelope was thick, official, and had that bureaucratic weight that screamed serious business. I walked back toward my workshop, a 1,200 square foot structure that sat about 30 feet behind my main house. The February air was crisp, and I could see my breath as I tore open the envelope. What I read made my blood run cold despite the heated interior of my workshop waiting just steps away. Dear Mr. Sullivan, it has come to our attention that you are operating a heating system in your detached workshop structure in violation of Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Covenant Section 4.7, which strictly prohibits the use of detached structures for anything beyond storage purposes. Furthermore, the excessive energy consumption from heating this structure represents a misuse of community resources and sets a dangerous precedent for other homeowners. You are hereby ordered to cease all heating of this structure immediately and discontinue whatever activities require such heating. Failure to comply within 14 days will result in daily fines of $250 until compliance is achieved. Sincerely, Karen Thompson, HOA President. I read the letter 3 times, each reading making me angrier than the last. Community resources. My electricity came from my own meter, paid for with my own money, and cease activities that required heating. That would mean shutting down my entire livelihood. I pulled out my phone and called my business partner, Derek. He answered on the second ring. Brett, what's up? I thought you were working on the Miller contract today. I am, or I was. Derek, the HOA just sent me a cease and desist about heating my workshop. They're saying I can't use it for anything but storage. There was a long pause. But your entire business is run from there. Your licenses, your equipment, everything is registered to that address. I know, I said, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. I need to figure this out fast. We have 6 active contracts right now. The workshop behind me hummed with activity. Inside were 3 industrial sewing machines, 2 heat press machines, cutting tables, and inventory storage for my custom embroidery and screen printing business. I had started Sullivan branded apparel 4 years ago, before I even moved to Meadowbrook Estates. The business was fully licensed through the state of Colorado, properly zoned, insured, and generated enough income to support my family and pay Derek's salary as my production assistant. When I bought the house, the workshop had been a major selling point. The previous owner had used it as a woodworking studio, and I had specifically asked the HOA board if there were any restrictions on using it for a home business. I remembered that conversation clearly. Karen Thompson had been on the board then, though not yet president. She had smiled and told me that as long as the business didn't create noise, traffic, or visual disruption to the neighborhood, detached structures could be used at the homeowner's discretion. I had that conversation documented in an email. I had kept everything. After hanging up with Derek, I marched back to my house and pulled up my files. Sure enough, there it was. A 3-year-old email from the previous HOA secretary, Margaret Chen, confirming that home-based businesses were permitted as long as they complied with county regulations and didn't disturb other residents. I had my business license, my certificate of occupancy for commercial use of the structure, and my commercial insurance policy all in order. I drafted an email to Karen, attaching all relevant documents. Karen, I received your letter regarding my workshop. As you can see from the attached documentation, this structure houses my licensed business, Sullivan Branded Apparel, which has operated here for 3 years with full HOA knowledge and approval. The business is properly licensed, zoned, and insured. Heating the workshop is necessary for operating my equipment, which requires specific temperature ranges for proper function. The business generates no noise beyond normal residential levels, creates minimal traffic, and is invisible from the street. I'm happy to discuss this further, but I cannot cease operations without effectively destroying my livelihood. I hit send and tried to get back to work. The Miller contract was for a local brewery that needed 200 custom T-shirts for their anniversary event in 3 weeks. I had promised them completion in 10 days, which meant I needed to focus, but my concentration was shot. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Karen Thompson, Mr. Sullivan, I just read your email and I'm afraid you're mistaken about several things. Her voice had that particular quality I had come to associate with officious bureaucrats, sweet on the surface but condescending underneath. What am I mistaken about, Karen? I have documentation showing the HOA approved my business use of the structure. That email was sent by Margaret Chen, who is no longer with the board and frankly had a very loose interpretation of our covenants. I've reviewed our founding documents thoroughly, and Section 4.7 is very clear. Detached structures are for storage only. Then why wasn't this raised 3 years ago when I moved in? Or any time in the years since? Because I only became president 8 months ago, and I've been systematically reviewing all properties for compliance issues. Your workshop came to my attention when I reviewed last quarter's satellite imagery updates we received from the county. Satellite imagery. She was actually using satellite photos to spy on homeowners. Karen, this is my business. My legally licensed, fully compliant business that supports my family. You can't just shut it down with 14 days' notice. I can and I am. The covenants are the covenants, Mr. Sullivan. Everyone must follow the same rules or we descend into chaos. You have 14 days to comply or the fines begin. Good day. She hung up before I could respond. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching Colorado HOA law. What I found was both encouraging and disturbing. Colorado had specific statutes protecting home-based businesses from unreasonable HOA restrictions, particularly revised Statute 3833.3-106.5, which prevented HOAs from prohibiting home occupations that were otherwise lawful. However, the law also gave significant power to HOAs to enforce their covenants, and legal battles could drag on for months or years. I called my attorney, a guy named Robert Morrison who had helped me set up my business structure years ago. He listened to my situation and let out a low whistle. Brett, you're in a tricky spot. You're right that Colorado law protects your business, but HOAs can be notoriously difficult. The good news is you have documentation showing prior approval. The bad news is Karen can make your life hell while this gets sorted out. Fines, liens, even foreclosure if things get extreme. Foreclosure, overheating my workshop, over unpaid fines that accumulate into liens. I've seen HOAs foreclose on homes for less. It's ugly, but it happens. My advice is to request a hearing with the board before the 14 days are up. Present your case, show your documentation, and try to get this resolved without litigation. I scheduled the hearing for the following Thursday, giving me 10 days before the deadline. In the meantime, I kept working. The brewery order had to be completed, and I had 3 other active projects. My workshop stayed heated, my machines kept running, and I documented everything. The day before the hearing, I received another letter from Karen. This one informed me that she had filed a complaint with Boulder County Code Enforcement, claiming I was operating an illegal business from a non-permitted structure. It was a bold move, and a stupid one. My structure was fully permitted. But it meant I now had to deal with a county inspector in addition to the HOA. The county inspector, a tired-looking man named Bill Rogers, showed up on Wednesday morning. He walked through my workshop with a clipboard, checking my permits, my electrical setup, my fire suppression system, and my occupancy certificate. After 30 minutes, he signed off on everything. "You're completely legal, Mr. Sullivan." I don't know what complaint your HOA filed, but this is one of the better home business setups I've seen. Everything is up to code, properly permitted, and safely installed. You'll get my written report in a few days. Can you attend the HOA hearing tomorrow night? Your testimony would be valuable. Bill shook his head. Can't get involved in HOA disputes on county time, but my report will speak for itself. Good luck with these people. HOA boards can be worse than any government bureaucracy. The hearing was held in the community clubhouse at 7 p.m. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documents, my laptop loaded with photos and permits, and a knot of anxiety in my gut. The board consisted of 5 members. Karen Thompson as president, a retired accountant named Donald Pierce as treasurer, a stay-at-home mom named Patricia Wells as secretary, and 2 regular members, George Martinez and Helen Burke. About 30 of my neighbors were in attendance, which surprised me. I recognized most of them from community events and casual interactions, but I wasn't close friends with anyone there. They sat in the plastic chairs arranged in rows, looking curious about the drama unfolding. Karen called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. She ran through standard business quickly, approving last month's minutes and reviewing the budget, before getting to my case. Item 7. The matter of Brett Sullivan and his unauthorized use of his detached workshop structure. Mr. Sullivan, you have 20 minutes to present your case. I stood up, forcing my voice to remain steady. Thank you. As many of you know, I run a custom embroidery and screen printing business from my workshop. This business has operated for 3 years from that location with, I believed, full HOA approval. I walked them through everything. The email from Margaret Chen approving the business use, my state business license, my certificate of occupancy from the county, my commercial insurance, and my compliance with all zoning regulations. I showed photos of my setup, demonstrating that the workshop was professionally arranged and maintained. I presented my county inspection report, received that morning via email, showing full compliance with all building codes. The heating of my workshop isn't excessive or wasteful. It's necessary for my equipment to function properly and for safe working conditions. My embroidery machines require ambient temperatures above 60 degrees to prevent thread breakage and tension issues. My heat press machines need climate-controlled environments to maintain consistent results. This isn't about comfort, it's about professional standards. I also address the business impact on the neighborhood. My business generates no noise audible beyond my property line. I receive 1 or 2 small shipments per week, no different than regular residential packages. Clients rarely visit. Most orders are placed online and shipped. There are no signs, no advertising visible from the street, nothing that would indicate commercial activity to a casual observer. I've operated here for 3 years without a single neighbor complaint. Karen listened with her arms crossed, her expression unchanging. The other board members took notes, looking uncomfortable. Finally, I said, I want to address the legal situation. Colorado Revised Statute 3833.3 106.5 specifically prevents HOAs from prohibiting lawful home occupations. My business is unquestionably lawful. It's licensed, permitted, insured, and compliant with every applicable regulation. I understand the HOA has legitimate interests in maintaining neighborhood character and property values, but shutting down a legal, non-disruptive business doesn't serve those interests. It simply destroys my livelihood without any corresponding benefit to the community. I sat down. Karen immediately stood. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Sullivan. However, you're fundamentally misunderstanding the situation. This isn't about whether your business is legal under state or county law. It's about whether it violates our covenants. Section 4.7 is absolutely clear. Detached structures may be used only for storage. Your workshop is not being used for storage. It's being used as a commercial facility. Therefore, it violates our covenants. But I have written approval from the HOA, I countered. You have an email from a former board member who exceeded her authority. Margaret Chen had no right to override our covenants. Her approval is meaningless. One of my neighbors, a guy named Tom Richardson who lived 3 houses down, stood up. Can I say something? Karen looked annoyed but nodded. Residents may speak for up to 3 minutes each. Tom gestured toward me. I've lived here for 5 years, and I had no idea Brett was running a business from his workshop. That tells me he's doing it right. He's quiet, professional, and not bothering anyone. Why are we making a problem out of something that isn't a problem? Another neighbor, an older woman named Barbara, stood next. I agree. This seems like a waste of everyone's time and energy. We have real issues in this neighborhood, like the broken streetlight on Maple Drive and the drainage problems near the park. Why are we targeting Brett? Karen's face flushed. Because rules matter, Barbara. If we allow one person to ignore the covenants, everyone will think they can do whatever they want. Next, someone will want to run a mechanic shop from their garage or open a daycare or operate a restaurant. We must maintain standards. But those are fundamentally different situations, I said. A mechanic shop would create noise, traffic, and visual blight. A daycare would generate significant traffic and noise. A restaurant would have health code issues and parking problems. My business has none of those impacts. I'm asking for reasonable accommodation under state law for a business that's been operating successfully and non-disruptively for years. The debate continued for another 40 minutes. Several neighbors spoke in my defense. A few sided with Karen, expressing concerns about setting precedents and maintaining property values, though none could articulate how my business specifically harmed their property values. Donald Pierce, the treasurer, asked detailed questions about my client volume and shipping frequency. Patricia Wells asked if I had ever considered renting commercial space elsewhere, which I explained would triple my overhead and possibly force me to close. Finally, Karen called for a board vote. All in favor of upholding the covenant violation and requiring Mr. Sullivan to cease heating his workshop and discontinue business operations there. Karen and Helen Burke raised their hands. All opposed. Donald Pierce, Patricia Wells, and George Martinez raised their hands. The motion failed. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Karen's face turned red. Very well. The board has voted to allow Mr. Sullivan to continue his operations, apparently prioritizing one resident's commercial interests over the integrity of our covenants. This meeting is adjourned." She grabbed her papers and stormed out of the clubhouse, leaving the other board members looking uncomfortable. Patricia approached me afterward. "I'm sorry about all this, Brett. Karen means well, but she can be overzealous. Your documentation was compelling, and frankly, you're right about the state law. We could have ended up in expensive litigation we would likely lose." "I appreciate your vote," I said. "I really do just want to keep my head down and run my business." "I know. Hopefully this is the end of it." It wasn't the end of it. The following Monday, I received another certified letter. This time, Karen was citing me for operating a commercial vehicle from my residential property because my work van had my business name and logo on it. She demanded I remove the van from the property or face fines of $100 per day. I called Robert Morrison again. "She's retaliating," he said immediately. "This is classic HOA harassment. The question is, does your covenant actually prohibit commercial vehicles?" I pulled up the covenants and searched. Section 6.3 prohibited commercial trucks over 1-ton capacity from overnight parking on the property. My van was a standard Ford Transit, well under 1 ton. It wasn't prohibited. I responded to Karen's letter with another detailed explanation, citing the specific covenant language and noting that my van fell within the allowable parameters. I also, on Robert's advice, documented the harassment pattern and sent a formal complaint to the other board members. 2 weeks later, Karen cited me for having too many packages delivered, claiming my business shipments violated the residential character of the neighborhood. I had received 3 packages that week. 2 contained embroidery supplies, and 1 was a personal Amazon order. The covenant had no provisions whatsoever regarding package delivery frequency. Then came citations for my workshop's exterior lighting, for parking my van facing the wrong direction one evening, for my trash can being visible 30 minutes past the allowed time, and for a dandelion in my front yard. Every citation came with threatened fines. Every citation required hours of my time to document, refute, and defend. It was exhausting and clearly intended to drive me out of the neighborhood. In April, things escalated. I arrived home from a supply run to find Karen and a man I didn't recognize standing in my backyard, peering through my workshop windows. "What are you doing?" I called out, walking toward them quickly. Karen turned, not looking remotely embarrassed. "I'm conducting an inspection of your structure to document ongoing covenant violations. This is Jim Hendricks, our HOA attorney. You're trespassing on my property. The covenants grant the HOA right of inspection for compliance purposes," Jim said, his tone professionally neutral. "The covenants grant right of inspection with reasonable notice and at reasonable times. You didn't provide notice, and you're literally looking through my windows without permission. That's trespassing." I pulled out my phone and called the Boulder Police non-emergency line. Within 20 minutes, an officer named Sarah Ortega arrived. She listened to both sides, reviewed the covenant language on my phone, and delivered her verdict. "Madam, the covenant does require reasonable notice for inspections. If Mr. Sullivan didn't receive notice, you're technically trespassing. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property." Karen sputtered objections but eventually left with Jim, shooting me looks that could melt steel. Officer Ortega took a report and advised me to consider a restraining order if the harassment continued. That evening, I sat in my workshop trying to work on a rush order for a local high school sports team. My hands shook with residual adrenaline. This had gone from bureaucratic annoyance to active harassment, and I wasn't sure how to make it stop. Derek called to check on the order status and could immediately tell something was wrong. "She was in your backyard. Brett, that's insane. You need to do something about this." "I don't know what else to do. I've documented everything, I've responded to every citation, I've proven my case repeatedly. She just won't stop." "Have you considered going on offense? She's the one breaking rules now. File complaints against her." It was a good point. I spent the next day drafting a formal complaint to the other board members, detailing Karen's pattern of harassment, the repeated frivolous citations, the trespassing incident, the retaliatory behavior following my successful hearing, and the time and stress this was causing. I requested that the board censure Karen and require her to cease all contact with me, except through proper official channels. I also reached out to my neighbors, particularly those who had spoken in my defense. Tom Richardson, Barbara, and a few others agreed to sign a petition supporting my business and requesting the board take action against Karen's behavior. Within a week, I had signatures from 28 households. The board called a special meeting for May 15th. This time, the clubhouse was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the dispute, and people were invested in the outcome. Some supported Karen's strict interpretation of the covenants. More supported the reasonable accommodation approach. The meeting was tense from the start. Patricia Wells, as secretary, read the formal complaint against Karen, including the trespassing incident documented by police report. Karen's face grew progressively redder as each item was listed. When Patricia finished, Karen exploded. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by Mr. Sullivan because I dared to enforce the rules he thinks don't apply to him. Everything I've done has been in service to this community and the preservation of our property values." "You trespassed on his property," George Martinez said quietly. "That's not enforcement, that's harassment. I have every right to inspect for compliance." "With notice," Donald Pierce interjected. "Karen, I've been patient because I know you care about this neighborhood, but you've gone too far. We voted against your original enforcement action. Instead of accepting that decision, you've engaged in a pattern of retaliation that's created liability for the entire HOA." Jim Hendricks, the HOA attorney sitting beside Karen, looked uncomfortable. "For the record, I advised against the inspection without proper notice. Mrs. Thompson proceeded despite my counsel." The board debated for over an hour. Neighbors weighed in, some defending Karen's passion for the neighborhood, others condemning her tactics. Finally, Donald Pierce motioned for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. George Martinez seconded. The vote was 4-1, with only Karen voting against. She was removed as president effective immediately. Donald Pierce was appointed interim president until the next regular election. Karen stood up, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. "You're all making a terrible mistake. This neighborhood will fall apart without proper leadership. You'll see." She stormed out for the second time in as many months, but this time she wouldn't be coming back to a position of power. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after her removal, Karen filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming my business operations had diminished her property value and seeking damages of $50,000. The lawsuit also named the HOA board for failing to enforce the covenants, seeking to compel them to shut down my business through court order. Robert Morrison reviewed the complaint and shook his head. "This is a nuisance suit, plain and simple. She has no real case. But defending it will cost you money and time." "How much money?" "Could be $10,000 or more in legal fees, depending on how long she drags it out. The good news is that if the judge determines this is frivolous, You can potentially recover your costs, but there's always risk in litigation. I felt trapped. Even winning would cost me thousands I didn't necessarily have. My business was doing well, but I wasn't wealthy. A protracted legal battle could seriously damage my finances. Then something unexpected happened. The HOA board, now led by Donald Pierce, voted to fund my legal defense as an HOA expense. Their reasoning was that Karen's suit against me was fundamentally an attack on the board's decision-making authority, and defending that authority benefited all homeowners. The lawsuit dragged through the summer. Discovery, depositions, endless paperwork. Karen's attorney tried to prove my business created traffic, noise, and visual impacts that harmed property values. We countered with testimony from my neighbors, county inspection reports, and an independent property appraiser who confirmed my business had no measurable impact on surrounding home values. In September, something else came to light during discovery. While reviewing HOA financial records for another matter, Donald Pierce discovered irregularities in the books during Karen's tenure as president. Money was missing. Not a lot, but enough to be concerning. About $7,000 in HOA funds had been spent on unauthorized expenses, including surveillance equipment and legal consultations specifically related to my case, which the board had never approved. Donald hired a forensic accountant who uncovered that Karen had been using HOA funds as her personal slush fund for her vendetta against me. She had purchased a drone to conduct aerial surveillance of my property. She had paid Jim Hendricks for legal advice without board approval. She had even hired a private investigator to dig into my background, trying to find any dirt she could use against me. This changed everything. Donald filed a criminal complaint with the Boulder Police Department for embezzlement and misuse of HOA funds. The civil lawsuit suddenly became much more complicated for Karen, as her credibility was destroyed. In late October, the police arrested Karen Thompson on charges of theft and embezzlement. The amounts were relatively small, making it a misdemeanor rather than a felony, but the arrest was still a shock to the neighborhood. The woman who had appointed herself guardian of community standards was led away in handcuffs. Her lawsuit against me collapsed immediately afterward. Her attorney withdrew from the case, and Karen, facing criminal charges, couldn't afford to pursue the civil matter. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled. Additionally, the judge awarded me costs, though recovering money from Karen would prove difficult given her legal troubles. The criminal case moved through the system with bureaucratic slowness. Karen pleaded guilty to misdemeanor theft in December, receiving a sentence of 1-year probation, community service, and restitution to the HOA for the misappropriated funds. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado for 5 years. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal. Donald Pierce proved to be a reasonable and effective HOA president. He initiated a comprehensive review of the covenants, working with an attorney to identify outdated or overly restrictive provisions. The detached structure language was clarified to explicitly allow home offices and businesses, provided they met certain reasonable criteria regarding noise, traffic, and appearance. My business continued to thrive. The brewery whose T-shirts I had completed during the height of the conflict sent me so many referrals that I ended up hiring a second employee, a recent college graduate named Michelle who had a design degree and needed practical experience. My workshop hummed along, heated appropriately, producing quality products for satisfied clients. In January, almost a year after the first certified letter had arrived, I received one final piece of mail from the HOA. It was a formal letter of apology from the board, acknowledging the harassment I had endured and thanking me for my patience throughout the ordeal. They also included a check for $1,500, representing my share of the recovered funds after legal expenses. I stood in my driveway, reading the letter on another cold February morning, thinking about how much had changed in 12 months. The workshop behind me was warm and welcoming, full of equipment and inventory. My business was stronger than ever. My relationship with my neighbors had deepened through the shared experience of standing up against unreasonable authority. Tom Richardson walked by with his dog and waved. "Hey Brett, I saw Donald updated the website with the new covenant language. Looks good." "Yeah, much more reasonable." "How's Baxter doing?" "Getting old, but still loves his walks." "You still on for the Super Bowl party next month?" "Wouldn't miss it." Simple neighborly interaction, the kind that makes a community actually feel like a community. That's what Karen had lost sight of in her obsession with rules and enforcement. Covenants exist to protect property values and quality of life, not to give power-hungry board members a fiefdom to rule. Inside my workshop, I had framed the original violation letter from Karen, hanging it next to my business license and permits. It served as a reminder of what I had overcome and why standing up for what's right matters, even when it's difficult. Derek arrived around 9 for our morning production meeting. We had 4 active contracts and 3 new quotes to review. Michelle was due in at 10 to work on designs for a corporate client. It was just another day running my licensed, legal, fully compliant business from my properly heated workshop. "You seem relaxed," Derek observed as we reviewed the production schedule. "I am. For the first time in a year, I'm not waiting for the next citation or complaint. I can just focus on work." "That's what happens when the crazy lady gets arrested for embezzlement," I laughed. "Yeah, that definitely helped." We worked through the morning, the winter sunlight streaming through the workshop windows. My phone rang around 11. It was a potential new client, a Denver-based tech startup that needed branded merchandise for a major conference. The contract would be worth about $30,000 if I could deliver on their timeline. "Absolutely, I can handle that volume. Let me put together a detailed quote and some mock-ups. Can I send those over by end of week?" We discussed details for 20 minutes. After hanging up, I felt that familiar thrill of landing a promising lead. This was why I had started my business in the first place. The satisfaction of creating quality products, serving clients well, and building something sustainable with my own hands and skills. Michelle arrived and dove into design work for the corporate client. Music played softly from a Bluetooth speaker. The heat press hummed as Derek worked on a rush order. Everything felt right in a way it hadn't for months during the conflict. That evening, I locked up the workshop and walked back to my house as the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains. The peaks were covered in snow, glowing pink and gold in the alpenglow. Boulders spread out below, lights beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. Inside, my wife Amanda was making dinner. We had gotten through the HOA nightmare together, her support unwavering even when things looked darkest. "How was work?" she asked, stirring pasta. "Good, really good, actually. Potentially landed a big contract today." "That's wonderful. I'm glad things are finally settling down." We ate dinner together, talking about normal everyday things. Her job as a physical therapist, our plans for the weekend, whether we should refinish the deck this spring. Normal married couple conversation, uninterrupted by legal threats or HOA drama. Later, as I sat in my living room with a beer watching a basketball game, I reflected on the lessons learned. Standing up to bullies matters, even when those bullies hide behind bureaucratic authority and claim to act in the community's interest. Documentation is crucial. Every email, permit, license, and photograph I had maintained became critical evidence. And community matters. My neighbor's support had been essential in fighting back against Karen's harassment. I also thought about Karen herself. What drives someone to such extremes? Her obsession with enforcing rules had ultimately destroyed her reputation, cost her money in restitution and legal fees, left her with a criminal record, and alienated her from the community she claimed to love. All because she couldn't accept that reasonable people could disagree about how to apply covenants to changing circumstances. The irony was that if she had simply accepted the board's initial decision after my hearing, none of the subsequent drama would have happened. My business would have continued operating quietly, bothering no one, generating no complaints. Instead, her need to be right and to punish me for challenging her authority had led her down a path of escalating misconduct until she crossed clear legal lines. Over the following months, I watched Meadowbrook Estates evolve under new leadership. Donald Pierce and the board made transparency a priority, holding open forums where homeowners could voice concerns and suggestions. They established clearer procedures for covenant enforcement, including mandatory review periods before fines could be imposed and formal appeal processes. They also launched a community newsletter highlighting positive neighborhood stories, including several features on residents who ran home businesses. It turned out I wasn't alone. There was a woman who ran a successful accounting practice from her home office, a man who did freelance software development, and a couple who created artisan candles. All of us contributed to the community's economic diversity, while respecting our neighbors' peace and quiet. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates continued to climb, driven by Boulder's strong economy and desirable location, not by harsh HOA enforcement. If anything, the neighborhood's reputation improved after Karen's departure, as potential buyers heard about the reasonable, transparent board governance. In March, I was invited to speak on a panel about home-based businesses at the Colorado HOA conference in Denver. It was surreal standing in front of 200 HOA board members and management company representatives, telling my story as a cautionary tale about overzealous enforcement. The key lesson, I told them, is that covenants should serve the community, not rule it. When enforcement becomes an end in itself, divorced from actual harm or complaint, it creates conflict and erodes the social fabric that makes neighborhoods desirable in the first place. Reasonable accommodation, clear communication, and basic respect for homeowners' rights should be the foundation of any HOA governance. The response was mostly positive, though a few old guard board members looked skeptical, probably sympathizing more with Karen's worldview than mine. That was fine. Change happened slowly, one reasonable decision at a time. My business continued to grow. By summer, I had hired 2 more employees and was considering expanding the workshop or potentially renting additional space. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's attempt to shut down my business had, through the publicity and community support generated, actually helped it thrive. In August, I saw Karen for the first time since her arrest. She was at the grocery store, looking older and more worn than I remembered. Our eyes met briefly across the produce section. She looked away quickly, her face flushing. I felt a moment of pity. Whatever satisfaction I might have expected from seeing her brought low was absent. She just looked like a middle-aged woman who had made terrible choices and was living with the consequences. I nodded politely and moved on. There was no point in confrontation or gloating. The matter was resolved. Life had moved on. September brought the HOA's annual meeting and board elections. Donald Pierce ran for a full term as president and won easily. Patricia Wells and George Martinez retained their seats. 2 new members joined the board, both younger homeowners with pragmatic attitudes about governance. The meeting was well attended but routine, lacking the drama that had characterized meetings during Karen's tenure. One agenda item particularly pleased me. The board voted to establish a small business support initiative, creating a directory of home-based businesses in the neighborhood and promoting them to residents. It was a complete reversal from Karen's enforcement-first mentality, recognizing that home businesses added value to the community rather than detracting from it. My workshop directory entry read, Sullivan branded apparel, custom embroidery, and screen printing for businesses, organizations, and events, serving Boulder and surrounding areas for 4 years, licensed and locally owned. Tom Richardson started using my services for his real estate business cards and promotional materials. Barbara ordered custom tote bags for her book club. Several other neighbors became clients and, more importantly, referred me to their own business contacts. The neighborhood network became a genuine asset. As autumn arrived again, painting the aspens gold across the mountain slopes, I found myself genuinely grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. The conflict with Karen had forced me to clarify my legal position, document my business thoroughly, and connect more deeply with my community. My business was stronger, my relationships were richer, and I had learned valuable lessons about standing up for what's right. One October afternoon, I was working on a complex custom embroidery job when my phone rang. It was Robert Morrison. "Brett, I have interesting news. Karen Thompson's attorney just contacted me. She wants to formally apologize to you. Part of her probation requirements includes making amends to those harmed by her actions. Are you willing to meet with her?" I considered this. What would the meeting involve? She would apologize, acknowledge the harm caused, and discuss any steps she could take toward making things right. It's part of restorative justice programming. You're under no obligation to participate. I thought about it for several minutes after hanging up. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Karen, wanted to leave that chapter firmly closed. But another part recognized that closure might be valuable, that hearing a genuine apology could be healing for both of us. I agreed to the meeting. It was scheduled for the following week at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Boulder. Robert accompanied me, and Karen came with a counselor from her probation program. Karen looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly around a coffee cup. The confident, authoritative demeanor I remembered was gone, replaced by someone who seemed smaller and uncertain. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she began, her voice shaky. "I know I don't deserve your time or consideration after everything I put you through." I nodded but didn't speak, letting her continue. "I've spent a lot of time in counseling this past year, trying to understand why I acted the way I did. My therapist says I have control issues, that I use rules and authority as a way to manage my anxiety about chaos and disorder. When you challenged my enforcement decision, it felt like a personal attack, and I responded by trying to destroy what you'd built. That was wrong, deeply, profoundly wrong." She took a shaky breath. "I trespassed on your property. I harassed you with frivolous citations. I stole HOA money to fund my vendetta against you. I tried to ruin your business and your life because my ego couldn't handle being told no. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate, but it's all I have to offer. I'm truly, deeply sorry for the harm I caused you and your family." The apology seemed genuine. I could see real remorse in her eyes, real understanding of what she'd done. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied carefully. "This past year has been difficult. You put me through hell over something that was never actually a problem. But I also recognize that you're taking responsibility now, which takes courage." "Is there anything I can do to make amends?" she asked. "Beyond the financial restitution I'm already paying," I thought about it. "Honestly, Karen, the best thing you can do is share your story with other HOA board members. Help them understand how enforcement can cross the line into harassment. Use your experience to prevent others from making the same mistakes." She nodded slowly. "I can do that. My probation officer has already asked me to speak at HOA training sessions about ethical governance. It's humiliating, but if it helps even one person avoid my mistakes, it's worth it." We talked for another 20 minutes, a surprisingly civil conversation about community governance, the challenges of HOA leadership, and the importance of balance between rules and reasonableness. By the end, I didn't forgive her entirely, but I did feel that the chapter was finally, truly closed. Walking out of the coffee shop into crisp autumn air, I felt lighter. The weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying had lifted. The conflict was over, not just legally but emotionally. Back at my workshop, Derek and Michelle were finishing up a large order for a local hospital system. Boxes of custom scrubs with embroidered logos were stacked neatly, ready for delivery. My business was thriving. My community relationships were strong. My home was secure, with no threats of fines or legal action hanging over me. That evening, Amanda and I took a walk through the neighborhood. The streets of Meadowbrook Estates were quiet, houses glowing warm in the gathering dusk. Kids played basketball in driveways. Neighbors waved as we passed. It felt like a real community, not a collection of properties governed by rigid enforcement. "You seem at peace," Amanda observed. "I am. Finally, it's really over. Think you'll ever get involved with the HOA board yourself? After everything you've learned, I considered this. Maybe eventually, not now though. I just want to focus on the business and enjoy living here without drama." We walked in comfortable silence, the Rocky Mountains rising to the west, the first stars appearing overhead. My workshop stood behind our house, its windows dark now but ready for another day of productive work tomorrow. Inside were my machines, my supplies, my livelihood, all operating legally and peacefully, despite one person's best efforts to destroy it. The following weeks and months passed uneventfully, which was exactly how I wanted them to pass. Business grew steadily. I hired another employee in November, bringing my team to 4 people plus myself. The workshop was getting crowded, and I began serious planning for expansion, either adding onto the existing structure or potentially building a small commercial facility elsewhere. This time, I started with conversations with Donald Pierce and the board, ensuring any expansion plans aligned with covenants and community expectations. The discussions were collaborative and productive, everything the interactions with Karen had never been. By December, I had preliminary approval for a 400-square-foot addition to my workshop, designed to match the existing structure and maintain the residential appearance from street view. The county permitting process would take several months, but there were no HOA obstacles this time. Christmas in Meadowbrook Estates was festive and warm. The neighborhood organized a lights competition, a cookie exchange, and a holiday party at the clubhouse. Amanda and I attended the party, mingling with neighbors who felt more like friends now. Tom Richardson's kids performed a chaotic but enthusiastic Christmas concert. Barbara organized a white elephant gift exchange that ended with Donald Pierce somehow going home with a bedazzled toilet seat. It was community in the best sense. People choosing to be together, not because covenants required it, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. As the year turned and January arrived, I reflected on how completely things had transformed from that February morning when I'd first received Karen's violation letter. What had seemed like a potential disaster had ultimately strengthened my business, deepened my community connections, and taught me valuable lessons about standing up for what's right. My workshop expansion broke ground in March. The construction would take about 8 weeks, giving me significantly more space for equipment and inventory. I was already planning to bring on 2 more employees by summer, potentially including an apprentice embroidery specialist to help with increasingly complex custom work. The expansion was featured in the HOA newsletter with a positive story about local business growth. Donald Pierce even attended the construction kickoff, shaking my hand for a photo and praising the professional design that maintained neighborhood aesthetics while serving business needs. "This is how it should work," Donald told me. "Homeowners pursuing their goals, the HOA providing reasonable oversight and support, everyone working together for community benefit." Karen never understood that. She thought her job was to enforce rules. Really, our job is to help this neighborhood thrive. The construction wrapped up in early May, right on schedule. The new space was perfect, climate-controlled, well-lit, efficiently designed. I moved in new embroidery machines, expanded my heat press capacity, and created a dedicated design studio for Michelle and our new graphic designer, Taylor. By summer, Sullivan branded apparel employed 6 people and was on track for our best year ever. We had contracts with businesses throughout Colorado and were beginning to get orders from clients in neighboring states. The business I'd started in a converted garage workshop had grown into a legitimate operation, all running from my properly heated, fully legal, HOA-approved workshop. In July, I was invited to speak at a small business conference in Colorado Springs about overcoming obstacles and building resilient businesses. I told my story about the HOA conflict, emphasizing lessons about documentation, legal preparedness, and community building. "The biggest mistake I could have made," I told the audience, "would have been to cave immediately to unreasonable demands. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight, even when it's scary and expensive and exhausting. But you also have to pick your battles wisely, document everything meticulously, and build coalitions of support. I couldn't have won alone. My neighbors, my business attorney, the other HOA board members, even the county inspector who verified my permits were all crucial to the outcome." The speech was well received. Several attendees approached me afterward with their own HOA horror stories. It seemed my experience was far from unique, though mine had the relatively rare happy ending of the antagonist actually facing legal consequences for their misconduct. August brought another milestone. I paid off the business loan I'd taken out 5 years earlier to purchase equipment and fund the initial workshop setup. Being debt-free felt incredible, especially given how close Karen had come to destroying everything I'd built. That month also brought news that Karen had completed her probation successfully. She had paid her restitution, completed her community service, and fulfilled all requirements, including speaking at multiple HOA training sessions about ethical governance. I felt genuinely happy for her that she was moving forward with her life, even as I remained grateful she was no longer in any position to impact mine. September marked 2 years since Karen's removal from the HOA board. Meadowbrook Estates had thrived under Donald's steady leadership. Property values continued climbing. Community events were well attended. The covenant review had modernized several outdated provisions while maintaining reasonable standards. Several more homeowners had started home businesses, all operating successfully without conflict. I attended the annual HOA meeting, no longer as a defendant but simply as an engaged homeowner. The meeting was productive and boring, exactly how HOA meetings should be. Budgets were approved, maintenance schedules were reviewed, board members were elected. No drama, no conflict, just neighbors working together to manage their shared community assets. October brought a surprising opportunity. A national embroidery industry magazine wanted to feature Sullivan branded apparel in a story about successful home-based apparel businesses. The reporter, a woman named Jessica, spent a day interviewing me and photographing the workshop. "You've built something really impressive here," she said as she watched my team work. "And the fact that you did it from a home workshop makes it even more remarkable." "It almost didn't happen," I said, and told her the HOA story. Jessica's eyes widened. "That's incredible. Would you be comfortable if we included that angle in the article? It adds a really compelling dimension about the challenges of home-based businesses." I agreed, and the article ran in the magazine's January issue. From HOA battle to business success, how Brett Sullivan turned conflict into opportunity, featured photos of my expanded workshop, interviews with my employees, and a detailed account of the conflict with Karen and its resolution. The article generated more business than I could have anticipated. Companies that valued the story of resilience and persistence reached out with contracts. My phone rang constantly with media requests. A podcast about entrepreneurship wanted me as a guest. A local news station did a feature story. Amanda laughed as she watched me fumble through a live television interview. "You're famous now, the HOA warrior who wouldn't back down." "I just wanted to heat my workshop and run my business," I protested. But I couldn't deny that the publicity was helpful, humanizing both me and the broader issue of reasonable accommodation for home businesses. By the time spring arrived again, 3 years after that first violation letter, my life had stabilized into a new normal that was better than the old one. My business employed 8 people and generated substantial income. My relationship with my HOA was collaborative rather than adversarial. My community connections were deep and meaningful. I still heated my detached workshop every winter day, my equipment humming along, producing quality products for satisfied clients. But now, I did so with complete confidence in my legal right to do so, backed by clear covenant language, proper documentation, and a supportive HOA board. The workshop expansion had proven its value, allowing me to take on larger contracts and more complex projects. We were producing everything from basic promotional T-shirts to elaborate custom uniforms for professional sports teams. The business I'd started with one machine and big dreams had grown beyond what I'd imagined possible. One afternoon in April, I stood in my workshop watching my team work. Derek was training a new employee on the heat press. Michelle was designing a logo for a startup company. Taylor was digitizing an embroidery pattern for a school district order. 2 other employees were preparing a shipment for a client in Utah. This was what I'd been fighting for during those dark months of conflict with Karen. Not just the right to heat a building, but the right to pursue my livelihood, to build something meaningful, to contribute to my community and economy. The principle had mattered more than the practicality, though the practical stakes had been high enough. I thought about Karen sometimes, wondered how her life had progressed after everything fell apart. I hoped she'd found peace and purpose, learned from her mistakes, and rebuilt her reputation. Holding grudges serves no one. She'd faced consequences for her actions, made amends as best she could, and I had no desire for further revenge or vindication. The HOA experience had taught me that institutions are only as good as the people running them. Covenants and bylaws matter, but they're tools that can be used wisely or wielded as weapons. Leadership that prioritizes community over control, collaboration over enforcement, and reasonableness over rigid rule following makes all the difference. As summer approached, bringing warm Colorado sunshine and the promise of another strong business quarter, I felt deeply grateful for everything that had happened. The conflict had been painful but ultimately constructive, forcing growth and change that benefited everyone involved, except the person who'd initiated it. My heated workshop stood behind my house, exactly where it belonged, humming with productive activity, generating income and employment, bothering no one, and contributing to the economic vitality of Boulder County. It was a monument to the principle that reasonable people, working in good faith, can resolve conflicts and find solutions that work for everyone. That, ultimately, was the real victory. Not defeating Karen Thompson, not winning legal battles, not even building a successful business, but proving that communities function best when we treat each other with respect, assume good faith, and prioritize actual harm over technical violations. The certified letters stopped coming. The fines never materialized. The threats evaporated. Life returned to normal, or rather, to a better version of normal than had existed before. And my workshop stayed heated through every winter, keeping my equipment running, my business thriving, and my family secure.